I bought this Game Gear for 40 euros. Apparently it was never opened, so let's check that and see what we got in our hands. Let's place the batteries. So let's use the game it brought, Sonic Chaos, to check if it works or not. It does turn on, but we don't have a picture or sound. And this is a common fault on Game Gears. So let's open it up, remove the 6 Phillips screws and the game bit screw with this special screwdriver. So opening the console up, the condition is fair, it's not bad. It's the first time I'm seeing one, but I can see that all the capacitors have corrosion on them, so they will most likely be replaced, all of them. As we can see, C68 is missing, so either this console was already open or it just exploded and vanished, because there's a lot of melted plastic on the poles where the poles are supposed to hit the board. This is a VA1, so we'll just go through and do an eye inspection to see if we can see anything else that's wrong besides the capacitors. So by checking the power board, these capacitors don't seem bulged, they seem okay, so they will probably stay. And the soundboard, as you can see here, it's out of screen, here it's full of corrosion around the capacitors. So let's start with removing this capacitor. We need to replace it. I put here a 47 Fahrenheit, it should be 0.47. You have here the list of them, so pause if you need. So in this position, C54, you need to put a 0.47 microfarad at 50 volts, and I've placed a 47 microfarad. So just so you know. So to remove the capacitors, we will need to use our flux to make sure we remove them safely, just to avoid lifting pads. If we lift pads, we need to do direct connections to where the lines go, or where the traces go. So we use heat. It smells a lot like rotten fish, these remains of the capacitors, so try not to breathe those vapors because it's not good for health. And we will then need to burn all this away in order to remove it from the pads so we can apply new solder. We do the exact same thing on the other capacitor. With both of these removed, we'll start cleaning using isopropyl alcohol with the brush. We need to remove the remains of the capacitors from the board to avoid future corrosion. We pass then our toothbrush also with isopropyl and a cotton bud also with isopropyl in order to remove fully what we have of the remains of the capacitors. We then apply our flux again in order to add solder to the pads, so we can then remove the old solder and have brand new one put on. We then renew the flux, and with our solder braid we will pass on the pads to remove the remains of solder from this area. And make sure to leave the pads completely cleaned, so then they can receive new solder and the new capacitors. As you can see, this still had remains of the residue from the capacitor, which is a pain in the app. On C55 it is clearly easier because there was less residue left over. So we can then see that the pads are completely clean. So as this continues with the residue, let's pass the cotton bud again. It's very important for the pads to be completely clean, otherwise if they still have remains of corrosion, they will continue to corrode over, and if they go to the traces, then it will be really bad and the board will stop working. So now we are on the step of replacing the solder. We need to put new solder on the pads in order for them to receive the new capacitors. So I will just do these two examples, because if I show you how to replace all of the capacitors, it will be a very boring video. Unfortunately, I forgot to hit record when I was putting this first capacitor, but I'll show you this one as it is exactly the same thing. So we need to apply a bit of flux, then apply a little bit of solder, and then we place the capacitor with the correct legs on the correct pads, because the capacitor has polarity, so you need to make sure to put the negative side on the negative pad. Okay, and then we attach it in place. We now do the necessary folds for the capacitor to be placed on its spot, and then can be soldered in place. Once that is done, with our hot iron at around 350 degrees Celsius, we then place the capacitor on its final resting area. With that done, we clean the area again with our toothbrush with isopropyl alcohol. So here, upon moving the capacitor, it released the negative leg, so it was not properly soldered, and we will need to apply a bit of flux and heat again in order to put it in place. Unfortunately, I end up ripping a pad off the board. So, as we have a trace from there directly to the resistor, I will just head the leg of the capacitor directly to the resistor in order so we have the complete circuit anyway. It's good that this has happened. This way we will have an example of what can happen when you are doing this sort of job on a console this hold. If you have any doubts on where it goes, you can check the schematic, the link for the schematic that I have on the description, and from there you can see exactly where each trace goes. So in regards to this specific capacitor C47, I don't have any 68 microfarad at 6.3 volts. The voltage, it is the minimum that we can use on this area, 6.3. So we can put a higher voltage, but normally not a higher microfarad. But it will not damage this circuit if we put a little bit higher than this. So I'll use 100 microfarad at 16 volts and it should be okay. So here we have the soundboard. As soon as I removed it, a capacitor dropped. So this means that all of the capacitors are toast. So we need to replace them all. I have these electrolytic capacitors available, so I will just swipe them all. Here I had to remove the connector for the sound so I could put the capacitor safely without melting anything, and here I'm showing you how to put the capacitors back in place. So it's the same exact thing we did before, but as these have a plastic base, you need to be more careful with that. Here, in order to put the connector back, we need to remove the old solder from the holes so that we can then fit it in place again. To place it, we just need to put it back and then solder the base with the help of flux and new solder. So it's very basic. We now apply new solder. Make sure to use the hot iron on one side and the solder on the other so that it flows directly into the hole. With that being done, we clean with our toothbrush and isopropyl alcohol. And our soundboard is ready to go back. and play some sounds. So when I was cleaning the board with isopropyl alcohol, I spilled a bit on the screen, and I will just use some screen cleaner with a soft tissue to remove these stains from the screen. So we now assemble everything back in the shell. We put all the Phillips screws back in place. So let's place the batteries back and check if we had any results on our repair. So first time turning it on, the screen goes blank. We don't have a game. Let's put a game. Sonic Chaos, as you know. And we have a result, which is great. We didn't have this before. And we have sound, we have picture. So I'd say this was a successful repair. So the screen is very dim. Apparently this is normal on this old type of consoles. And the sound, as you can hear, it's very loud, so that's good. Let's then play a little bit to see if everything is working. So, incredibly, we managed to fix this console and everything is working as it should. So, I don't think this is the last we see of this Game Gear on the channel, because I will try to get an LCD screen and modify it. So, if you want to see this future update on the Game Gear, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and I will see you on the next video. You have a good one.